Hello and welcome to this webinar, Experiences in Digital Learning. And clearly one of the learning is to turn the mute button off, and I think we've all experienced that. So welcome here. It's lovely to have a great panel today, and I know there's a good audience. We will be recording this event and we will share the recording with you. So we've got a very exciting lineup. We're looking at institutional responses to the impact of COVID-19 today. So almost 15 months on from when we started back in March with the massive lockdowns and the emergency response, we're now taking the opportunity to consider how that's been for institutions and also to think about what the implications are for the future. So in our panel this afternoon, we have Jonathan Baldwin from JISC. So we're going to get that sector-wide perspective, and he's got some really interesting findings to share with us. And then we have two senior colleagues from two very important universities that happen to be part of the University of London Federation. So I'm delighted to have here with us Stephanie Marshall and Elisabeth Hill. So I'm going to go straight in and ask Jonathan to start, because I want to give chance for as much discussion as we can. And just to let the audience know, you can enter questions, comments, issues that you want to raise in the Q&A panel. So just type it in and that'll come through to us. So we would welcome your comments as we're going along through the event. Over to you, John. Thank you.
Linda, thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you. There was a fleeting photograph of me wearing a tie there. That's a thing of the distant past, but I do still have a drawer full of ties. I've probably forgotten how to tie them, but anyway, oh, there you go. Thanks, Andrew. We've got a relatively short time to present, so let me crack on. And I wanted just to, by preamble, if we've got the next slide, Andrew, talk about our Learning and Teaching Reimagined project, which ran May through November last year. As you can see from the slide, we partnered with Universities UK, with Advance HE, with Emerge Education. We had a steering group of 14 Vice-Chancellors. We touched over 1,000 colleagues in the sector, and we tried to get under the skin of what was happening at the start of this pandemic, what the thinking was for the next academic year, the one we're now in, and then importantly cast the eyes out to 2030. The next slide, Andrew, just shows briefly the focus of the project to try and shape, following exploration, a tech-enabled learning and teaching model that UKHE could subscribe to reflect, as I say, on the initial impact of the pandemic, and think about the shift to technology-enabled learning and teaching. Next slide, please. Before I just talk to that slide, as we worked through Learning and Teaching Reimagined, we issued two reports, an interim report in August and the final report in November. In August, it was clear that universities were beginning from this is a generalisation, a low digital base. There was a long way to go to meet rising student expectations. Universities needed to be more adaptable, open and responsive. There was a low but growing level of digital maturity, and teaching a technology-enhanced learning provision was far from mainstream. The main report showed that the value of online learning as an experience was inextricably linked with the wider experience. Separating the two was a false dichotomy. And the most appealing elements of online came when there was an interconnectivity between learning, between support, sociability, motivation, and emotion. Students were generally enjoying online learning. They found it engaging, they found it interactive. There was flexibility, there was accessibility, there was convenience. But on the other hand, it was less sociable. There was a sense of isolation. There was potential for loneliness. It was harder to communicate, and there was certainly losing the sense of community. So as we move from that to now, the challenges we face are set out, I think, quite nicely on that slide, which is put together following work we did, but also looking at work that colleagues in Gartner, in Educause in the US, and Accenture did. You know, as users, how do we bring joy and serendipity from the real world to the screen? In technological terms, how do we handle different experiences, rising expectations? And across the sectors, how do we shape, I'm thinking FE as well as HE, how do we shape a compelling and affordable offer that, you know, makes sense for the learner, makes sense for academics and for the communities that make up the university. As a result of this, we dived in and had a deep look at student experiences, what they were telling us from their pandemic learning lives, really. And in December last year, we surveyed 22,000 students, and the following slides give us some indication of what they were thinking and therefore what the institutional challenges are. So the next slide, Andrew, please. Sorry. Through the process of learning, teaching, reimagine, we then refined our higher education strategy. This is it, powering UK higher education. 4 strategic themes in this document, which are on the next slide. Empowering culture and leadership, reimagining learning, teaching and assessment, reframing the student experience and transforming infrastructure. And we've got really good examples from the membership of work that's been ongoing in individual institutions. And it's the next set of slides that show us what the students were thinking. I was ahead of myself. So here's what HE students are telling us. There's perhaps no surprises here, but given this is a survey of 22,000 learners, it's quite instructive. So obviously online lectures aren't the same as campus lectures. It's difficult to stay engaged staring at a screen for 8 hours a day. The best lectures, tutorials, when they're well organised, to the point, cover everything succinctly. Nothing new there. As we dug into that as an example, students said to us, you know, we miss lectures, and we thought that's interesting. And when we dug into that further, what they really meant was not actually missing the act of the lecture, but the informal learning that goes on in and around those lectures. The social connections as you go in or out of the lecture theatre, the checking understanding and so on and so forth. You'll see, I'm not going to read each line out, but give us guidance, help us to engage, use bubble groups, create support networks. Next slide, please, Andrew. Positive elements of online learning. Look, it helps us. We can watch, we can revisit often. It's not a one hit only. We can go back, we can rewind, we can check, think, ask a few questions. We can go at our pace. You know, an assumption that everybody can learn at the same pace in the same way has long been questioned. Online blended delivery helps that. We can catch up. Certainly helpful when English is not the first language, and also audibility often better than sometimes in large, rather cavernous lecture theatres, perhaps in old physical estates. Next slide, please, Andrew. More positive feedback. Live sessions more interactive and engaging than pre-records because you can ask questions in real time. Flexibility and convenience, as I've said, building engagement around other commitments, learning with and from peers important, not always easy to build in, and appreciation of the really good work that universities have done through this pandemic in terms of curriculum redesign, communication and support. But that has to be kept up, that the quality of what we deliver has to be secure for the long term. Next slide, Andrew. Less positively is the ability to access resource. There is a real digital poverty question, access to broadband, to devices, curriculum designed that needs high-end devices is sometimes problematic. Timeliness, not always what it should be. Scheduling built around the needs of the institution rather than the needs of the student. Sometimes the sheer volume of stuff can be overwhelming. I think we would understand that. Maintaining focus, screen time is hard, sometimes lectures too long, insufficient breaks, and communicating between colleagues, between groups, difficult, and at the bottom there, isolation and loneliness. Next slide, Andrew.
Please.
So what can we do reflecting on that positive and negative feedback? Of course, get the basics right. Wi-Fi on and off campus, access to hardware, software, etc. Interactivity, can we build in quizzes, games, tests? Can we build in light-hearted moments, breaks that make sense? Can we use recordings effectively? The development of staff. Remember, this is new for many staff, certainly on this scale, and I think there's a need to sort of understand and respect and reflect that. Think about pace, think about opportunities to talk, to ask questions, and of course, offer timely feedback. Feedback's always an issue in the teaching and learning process, particularly so in this format. Next slide, please. Is Stephanie Marshall. I'm perfectly on time in my 10 minutes, colleagues. Apologies for the stutter halfway through. I was playing with my slides just before we kicked off. Thank you, Linda.
Thanks very much, John. That excellent. I mean, it's so useful to see that framing in terms of what the students feel and experience in relation to the success of online learning that they've engaged with and assessment. Colleagues who are in the audience, please do feel free to input questions in the Q&A panel. And while colleagues are doing that, I might start off perhaps and just ask you, what does JISC see as the biggest opportunity they have to support success as we go through into Andrew, maybe take the slides off because I'm seeing them. I'm not sure if the audience is this. They're scrolling past fast. Perhaps we're just looking at John at the moment. Be great, thank you. So let me start that again. What does JISC see as the biggest opportunity for the sector organisation like JISC to support institutions in terms of a successful, if complex, 2021-22? So what are the areas that you're particularly focusing on?
It's a good question, Linda. I mean, I think one of the great things about Learning, Teaching, Reimagined was its inclusivity. Too often, I think that the sector is in various ways splintered. You know, whether that's through mission groups or professional associations or particular institutional directions. Through LTR, we had engagement right across higher education, right across all professional associations. IT directors, librarians, pro-vice-chancellors, registrars, etc. And we've managed, I think, therefore, to widen and deepen our reach, JISC's reach into our members, and through the vehicle of LTR, have conversations with management teams of universities rather than individual members of management teams. And as you know, delivering the best educational experience relies on the combined and intertwined efforts of all of those actors. And so our focus has been to try and help join those dots across, the professional services, the student supporting organisations, the teachers, the researchers. Particular focus, I think assessment is very important and key. As you move into different methods of delivery, the way in which you ensure that the assessment of that delivery, particularly when it's being done online, is an integral part of that learning process. That is a particular focus for us and seems to be a considerable challenge in a number of the universities with whom we work, Linda.
Thanks, John. Yeah, it's a huge scope, isn't it, actually? But thank you very much for that. One of the questions that's been submitted, and I think it's a question that's definitely perplexing and interesting for all of us, is the question of how we provide opportunities for more social interactions between students and presumably students and staff. that sort of informal, and you mentioned how students like the lecture because perhaps it was the before and after opportunities for informal connections that really helped there.
Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult in the virtual world to create those moments of informality, serendipity, you know, I've no easy answers to that. It's interesting as I speak with colleagues in universities, how many students have chosen to return to campuses, even though the rules have been as they are. There are probably more students on campus than, you know, we might imagine. Why have they come back? They've come back partly because if they're young, they've got, you know, they've missed the kind of opportunities to mix with their friends, their people of their own age group, but also because as they learn, they need that learning moment with others. And I think the design of the learning experience for next year, because there will still be blended approaches to this, despite campuses reopening, needs to have a heady mix really of traditional, let me call it that, and online provision, including for those students who are commuter students in one form or another, the ones who, you know, travel in and out. How we actually make that happen, Linda, how universities can afford to offer mixed mode teaching across the range of modules that make up a program or a course is something that, you know, there are no easy answers to.
Absolutely, and I think you know, I think universities will be looking to the support and interaction with JISC to help understand some of those technical capabilities and challenges that we need to develop. Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. Just having a look at the questions. We've got a question that's come in. How can we guide students to avoid spending excessive times learning all of the content in lectures in a way they didn't for live lectures? That's a really interesting question, isn't it? That phenomenon that students are almost learning by rote. They're going to, I lecture, they're then going to recite to me back to me and be quoting me a lot to me. Yeah. Interesting.
I hope, Linda, and it will be interesting to hear Stephanie and Elisabeth shortly, I hope that academics have taken this opportunity to reflect on the way they deliver their modules, their programs, their courses, and you know, therefore, in terms of the expectations of a lecture 18 months ago, maybe that's different now. And I remember speaking with the Vice Chancellor at a relatively early point in the pandemic, and this Vice Chancellor said they'd given up with some of their academics in terms of compelling them to deliver their teaching online. That wasn't because these academics were poor teachers. In fact, quite the opposite. They were very good teachers, and the Vice Chancellor wanted them on campus so that the on-campus experience for students, as they could have it, would be the very best. But even in those situations, the way you know, engage with and deliver your curriculum, I would really hope this has been a spur to change. And so those expectations embedded in Delia's question there might fundamentally have altered anyway, I would hope.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. But it's not only a revolution or a set of innovations and evolution in the way we lecture, but it's to some extent also evolution in the way that the students engage themselves and the support that they may need to foster new learning habits as well. So I think, yes, it's a definitely exciting time. I think another question popped in from David. So David's added that there are online systems that allow some of the features of informal contact. Wonder.me is one such. And he's asking the question about whether methods have been used. I don't know, John, if you know kind of from sector interactions, whether organisations and universities are using some of these social space type resources.
I don't know about the specific one, David. What I'm going to do, Linda, I'll send you post-session just a little digest of some of the work we're doing with some of our members across those 4 strategic areas: culture, leadership, teaching, learning, teaching, assessment, etc. And you'll see, David, that some of those are indeed in that space, but I can't comment on that particular tool.
That'd be really helpful. Thanks, John. I think if it's okay, we'll probably move on. And I know that some of the themes that, well, you've set the scene really brilliantly for us there. You know, you've raised all of the issues that I think we're going to be thinking about in terms of institutional responses. Oh yes, there's a comment here. Some students become complacent and do not pay attention during class and/or miss class, as they thought they could watch the videos later. In the end, they did not tune in to watch the recording again. Yes, I mean, I think that was the case in sort of pre-COVID times. I guess that's what the audience member was referring to, that students didn't attend their campus sessions and then relied on the recorded video to watch later. I mean, one of the things that we've been discussing a lot is the difference between the recording of a lecture that's happening in a room that is an hour long, and the Panopto system is in, or another system is in the room recording that lecture. I think that's quite different to some of the work that staff are currently doing to produce lectures specifically for the online. So some of the things that we've been working with colleagues about is having short videos rather than a video of the hour-long lecture. John, have you got any sort of comments on that question around students and their behaviours?
Well, I mean, it is a fair observation. What do I think? I mean, it feels to me as if the sort of contract between student and university is fundamentally questioned and challenged by the pandemic. You know, the voice of the student has always been important. It feels like listening to them and what they want and need is more important. I chaired a podcast last month with Anne Carlisle, the VC of Falmouth University, Chris Husbands, Sheffield Hallam, Alec Cameron, Aston. And Chris Husbands said something very simple, but it stuck with me. He said, we used to think we knew our students well. Turns out we have to get to know them a whole lot better. And I say that in the context of this observation because their learning preferences and styles gain more force and traction through the pandemic. And what I don't know the answer to this, and I'd be interested in comments from the audience. Some students will want more online and blended learning opportunities this next academic year and beyond. Others will want to return to on-campus delivery. I'm sure some universities will focus on their campus and what that offers in terms of delivery. That will be their unique selling point. Others might prefer to offer more in a blended and distant way. I don't think anyone can afford to do everything in every way, and therefore satisfying the needs of every student and the learning styles of every student becomes really rather challenging. So it's not an answer to the question, although I think it was more of a comment than a question. It's really just a stimulus or an attempted stimulus to discussion, Linda.
I just want to say a few things before I start talking about our institutional response, if I may, please. And that's to say something about Queen Mary University of London, because I'm not sure that everybody here will know the details of why Queen Mary is so special. Of course it's special. It's my institution. No, but seriously, it is an amazing Russell Group institution with a real difference. We've got 28,000 students. As you know, some of ours, of course, are in Paris as well. 75% of our students are Black, Asian and minority ethnic. And I think that puts us right at the top of the Russell Group league table of social inclusion. And also from those, 90% are from state schools, 51% are first in family in higher education, many from the worst deprived areas of the UK. So we feel really, really proud about how we support our students, particularly as we've just about closed the differential attainment gap. So you can imagine moving towards and realizing that a pandemic was in the offing, what it meant to us in terms of how do we make sure we support each and every student to succeed, because you know, working on the whole diversity piece, inclusion, retention and success did in our minds pose challenges in terms of the way we thought about how we needed to respond. So I want to pick up particularly on John's point, one of the 4 strategic themes and from JISC in terms of that whole empowering culture and leadership in this new pandemic world. And I'll talk about post-pandemic world a bit when I go through my slides. I've only got a few slides, so just bear with me. It's more the narrative around those and what we did that I hope will make it come alive for you. So it's against that backdrop of all the great work that JISC was doing. How do institutions respond? And I think it's varied somewhat according to the different cultures, the different styles of leadership, the different missions. Our vision is to open the doors of opportunity, and we mean that in terms of both staff and students. And I have to say, our values are very much around people, culture, and inclusion. So let's look at our strategy 2030 that is very much opening the doors of opportunity. Next slide, please, Andrew. So we've got a strategy 2030, and I've been at Queen Mary now 3 years, and as I arrived they were just starting to develop the strategy. So I have to say I'm thrilled that I've been part of that whole evolution of the strategy development where we are and now the rolling out. And it's very much 2 sides to one coin, research and education. One informs the other, and it's that continual flipping between and working out the interface. Now, in terms of what we hope to do on the education side was very, very much then about that hybrid approach to the education piece, a really fulfilling educational piece that involved technology enhanced learning, technology enhanced assessment. And so I was pleased John was saying that just going to be doing a lot more on that front, because it's still posing so many challenges in terms of getting our head around that. And also, you know, what is world class in thinking about innovation in the learning space? And we did feel individualized learning needed to be part of it. So almost individualized learning accounts that we then advisors support. So in terms of everything that we were planning to include even internships, because we put in the strategy that each student would be having an internship as part of their education at Queen Mary and opportunities for work experience. Despite the pandemic, we're able to accelerate that ambition. So one of the things in terms of culture change and leadership that I felt was really worked in our favor was being able to say, we're not proposing an alternative to what we did in the past. What we're doing is proposing that we're moving forward on this agenda that we'd all agreed through the development of our strategy 2030. Prior to the pandemic, though, as well, this second bullet was this notion of what does a community of education excellence look like? And I'd started working up some away days for program directors and for directors of education. We had those periodically, but as soon as we could see what was coming on the horizon, the need to go online, actually the online served us so well because we were having fortnightly 2-hour meetings with the program directors and also with the directors of education separately to start looking at what we needed to do together and to work collectively in terms of supporting them in becoming the academic leaders to help change the culture. I was kind of laughing to myself in terms of some of the questions that were asked and some of the responses, because cynics at the start in terms of I'm not doing anything online, I'll drop my PowerPoints into the VLE and that's it. And we offered support for each and every person because we came up with our baseline standards for digital, aided by the JISC frameworks. and found, as is often the case, the cynics give them some one-on-one support and they become the greatest advocates and are so excited about what they do. I have to say, our student body being so wonderful, were up for helping the poor old lecturers who were struggling with this. And so they introduced, in terms of lectures and things like that, how do we get some quizzes in? How do we get some interactivity in terms of what we might be doing in both the synchronous and the asynchronous? So I think that first pivot to going online was so aided by that community of education excellence that I would say was our academic leadership. Another, thank goodness, key enabler of our strategy was the Queen Mary Academy, and thank goodness this was part of the 2030 strategy, and it was something that I talked about when I arrived at the at Queen Mary. And of course, having been chief executive of the HEA, I just thought actually we could kind of have a mini sort of our own version of the academy at Queen Mary that would help accelerate things. So the Queen Mary Academy had only been set up in that late January, and the directors started their work. Poor old Janet DeWilde, who is the director of our Queen Mary Academy, suddenly, from thinking she was building up the academy, suddenly everything was about, right, how can we mobilize support now in terms of supporting the move to online? And of course was doing it online herself. So if you were to ask her now how much time has she spent on campus and how much time at home, the majority of her time will have been at home working remotely to upskill everybody as a result of the 3 lockdowns. And I have to say, it's been a godsend having that bit, the academy, that was supposed to be to support the education enabling plan, to really support our staff. Next slide,
2 minutes
please.
left, please.
Okay. So next slide. Where do we want to get to? Well, we're hoping that we're carrying on then getting towards that vision I articulated earlier, but most particularly learning how to learn being a real biggie. And so if we can help our students with that, and of course how to learn remotely, but it's only going to happen though if our staff are able to facilitate what we need to do in that journey. The culture of teaching though, I think we've seen a massive change in terms of the culture. People have had to reevaluate their professional identity, for one thing. We've had to move from that, secondly, that cult of the individual to be much more the team working and realizing we can't do this on our own. From an academic perspective, we've got to bring in the learning technicians, we've got to bring in the students, we've got to really co-create. And I think that thirdly, the cultural change has been new ways of working. So when we're working remotely, it's kind of, we're working quite individually in terms of what we're doing. But then when we're together, we want that in-person social as well. And that's where the question earlier about have we used any of the apps we have at Queen Mary, and we find them really, really helpful in establishing community of practice. So students are engaging more actively. In fact, when talking to students, when I've been on campus in between lockdowns, they've suggested it's much harder now. Lectures have got to concentrate more because they're being quizzed. The lectures are broken up into different activities. And therefore they're saying, I've even heard some saying we're having to use our brains. I liked it when we could just go to sleep, waltz into a lecture looking forward to the coffee afterwards. Similarly, I think with the assessments, they've said it's much harder. Where we've really developed excellent online authentic assessment. However, we still have more to do there. Final slide, please. So where are we now? I think technologies are empowered our students. For example, you know, now a lecture online, class of 150, there can be 110 questions that come up through the chats that are able to be looked at. We introduced alumni mentoring, and a lot of the alumni mentoring has been also alumni mentoring. Let's have a day at work with our mentor, which has been great. Our students have pushed ever since I got there, and it's supposed to be policy access to lecture recordings. Now, no question around that, because all lectures have to be recorded, and we're certainly not going back, because I get sick at times. I guess it's stopped now. When are we going back to what it was like before? We're not. But, and this is something that John raised as well, we still have some challenges around digital poverty. We did a lot we did a lot to support that, and certainly I think we're as best as we can be on top of that, but nothing beats having the space on campus, which we have kept open for those able to come onto campus, to be able to use the facilities there. Another area, though, in terms of changing the culture, we're trying to get on top as well as online behaviour. Online behaviour should be respectful as well. We're not 100% on top of that, but I hope we will be at the beginning of next year when we transition students in and really set out our contract in terms of our expectations for the really inclusive, caring community that we want Queen Mary to be. So, right, I think that's probably me for time. Apologies for the quick canter through as well, but hopefully you've got a flavour of what we did and the direction of travel. And I have to say that whole co-creation piece in terms of the culture.
Thanks, Stephanie. Some really powerful and interesting ideas that you've surfaced there, picking up on some of the things that John was talking about as well. I mean, I was particularly interested in, and I think the audience will be, on the ways in which you have facilitated those sort of social interactions and peer-to-peer interactions, very valuable for students. But I also got a real sense of a commitment from you and from your colleagues to a student-centered perspective that's around focusing on learning and teaching. How it's interesting, because you said at the beginning that you sort of I interpreted it, you said that people sort of stepped forward when it all happened, when we went into the lockdown. Were they already people there, or was it some, were there some unusual people who sort of stepped forward who you weren't expecting would come into those roles?
I have to say, I was so thrilled that so many of our junior colleagues stepping forward, I can help. And in fact, the Queen Mary Academy has a set of fellows who are bought out of their departments for a day a week. And the number of junior staff we have on those contracts to help that are really technological whizzes, but so committed to the co-creation with students as well. I'm really proud of what I see now as the emerging academic leadership pipeline that we've established there. And we, when I arrived, we introduced the Principal's Prizes for Teaching Innovation. Well, we've kind of doubled that. We've taken it down to the faculty level so that we could recognise and reward junior staff. Well, yeah, I think they're virtually to a person, junior staff, but junior teams, because we wanted to encourage teams to come forward. And so, yes, we've seen an emerging, growing community of practice, which I just think has been so rewarding. But many of them as well, we've encouraged them to be working with the students. I have to say, we've had a great students' union team working with us tirelessly this year and doing constant feedback, because in the autumn, when we went into the blended learning, which was greatly enhanced by spending much of the summer with some really external, great third-party providers doing the upskilling of staff. And staff did a brilliant job, but so did the students, because the transitions piece, we did our best, but the students kept feeding back, we need more face-to-face. The online, it's wonderful, it's engaging, but we need more face-to-face as well. And then just as we were getting that, then bang comes the next lockdown.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, a real new emerging group, and a lot of them are on teaching and scholarship contracts as well, which is, I don't know how normal that is in terms of looking at comparable it is across the Russell Group, because we say our students learn in a research-rich environment, and that's really stimulating, and that's a big part of their success. But we do have a number more now teaching and scholarship, and I'm really proud of the work they do and the leadership they do.
Interesting. Certainly, we're hearing one of my colleagues quoted the suggestion that this has been the year of the teaching, even though she's her background is research and she's a researcher, but for her and her colleagues, it's been the year of teaching that has come very much to the forefront, because that's been what's needed in order to successfully meet the students' expectations. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. I'm going to move on, if I may, to Elisabeth, just in terms of timing and so on. Elisabeth, I think you aren't able to mute, but we're going to do the WhatsApp phone call approach to this, if that's okay.
So, start again. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. What I'm going to do, the experiences that Stephanie spoke about in terms of Queen Mary are extremely resonant with what we've been kind of doing at Goldsmiths before the pandemic and through it. So I'm not going to repeat those, but I'll just sort of place that out there. What I really want to focus on in the next few minutes is very much around how we responded and how we've engaged students in that work. And there's going to be a little bit kind of pre-pandemic, during, and then post. So in the old normal, as I think of it, the majority of the provision at Goldsmiths was face-to-face. The support that we gave to staff to support students in pedagogically varied ways, particularly in relation to using technology, but not solely, was provided through what we call TALIC, our Teaching and Learning Innovation Centre. And TALIC, very much you could go and drop into one of the houses in this picture, and you could see someone face-to-face, or they'd come to your department, or you could engage with them online. We were in the process at the point of sort of the 1920 academic year starting, of having almost drawn to a conclusion, a huge piece of work that was absolutely initiated off the back of student feedback, which culminated in a digital recording of live educational activities policy, which kind of sat with the rollout of the Panopto recording system, which we brought in just before the pandemic started. And this kind of becomes important as we move through. So Andrew, if you could go on to the next slide, please.
Yep, moving on to the next slide.
On to the next slide.
Yep.
And so what this meant was that at that point, I stood up in front of our heads of department on the 16th of March 2020 and basically said, we are moving everything online overnight. We're going to make a reading week out of this week. We're going to make up the time in these other ways. So this is what we're going to do. Now, at that point, we had a good number, but not as large a number as we would have needed if we'd have known we were about to do this, of champions, if you like, who had been using Panopto and who were really working hard to support staff in that kind of rollout. And the figure that you can see here just effectively indicates or shows that we were able to kind of see from our data downloads that actually, yes, at that point where we went into lockdown on the 23rd of March and we were asking staff that everything was online, we saw a massive uptick in the use of that system, which gave us confidence that people were working in the way that we had over those few months, but also the previous week, been asking them to work. The next slide, Andrew. So the next slide is really just an illustration of the fact that what TALIC, our team in TALIC, did within kind of hours, essentially, was created or started to create a whole set of materials for staff to help the staff develop the techniques they needed to then support students' learning. And over time, that kind of set of resources has grown and grown. Some of it's been workshops, a lot of online courses, if you like, and guidance. And through that guidance, TALIC has very much worked to illustrate good practice and illustrate the use of technology by using that technology and that practice. And we have, for example, thinking about learning communities, TALIC developed a strong learning community of staff through this approach, illustrating how to build a student community online, and then staff help to support one another through that means. So that was a kind of principle of the way that we worked to support staff, to support students. And TALIC also provided guidance to students, picking up on one of Stephanie's other points around, or perhaps John's point, around actually how we guide students to work through their online learning and take the bits from it and pull it together in the right ways at the right time, how to organise themselves. And that's something we rolled out through last summer for the new academic year. Andrew, we can skip the next slide and go straight to slide 5. So we then have the kind of what I think of as the pandemic normal, where through the last academic year, we all know there's been some possibility of some face-to-face teaching. The majority of teaching has been online, and that has been the case for many students. We have a large proportion of our students on practice programs, and that's obviously been an additional complexity for online learning. But one of the things that we have found to be really important and helpful has been the way in which we've engaged with students through the Students' Union, through the rep system, and through our student engagement team, which is university-based, in engaging in a very, very constant way at department level and at whole college level to ensure that we're supporting students, but we're hearing their feedback, and then we're using that to make changes to our approach in different ways as we go through the year and also for the future. So a couple of examples: our student engagement team have run pulse surveys, which they've fed back round through the year. The departments, through their sort of usual channels, have been doing that work. And we've been running a survey asking students to respond in relation to their face-to-face learning, their digital learning, and access to campus resources such as the library through this past year. And again, I mean, on this slide, you've got a quote, which I'm sure we'd all hope all of our students would feel. It's not everything that students feel, but the information that students have been giving us about their experience of different types of online learning and different types of on-campus learning in the pandemic, and the blend of those have been really critical in how we think about delivering our curriculum and our pedagogy moving forward. And then that just moves me on to the last slide, Andrew, which is really about the new normal, and that's something we're obviously all planning now, what happens in the next academic year and beyond. And just as Stephanie was talking about almost an acceleration of their earlier approach, that's exactly what we're doing at Goldsmiths. So we're very much using our digital recording system, Panopto, the development or the accelerated development and upskilling of staff to deliver innovative teaching online or in a blended form online and on campus. And we've launched a comprehensive curriculum review, which is a huge piece of work across the institution, where we're looking at curriculum, pedagogy and assessment. Student voice is hugely important in that, and that will then feed into how we approach a much more flexible and blended learning as an institution for the years to come. And that will link into our learning teaching assessment strategy, it will link into our institutional strategy, it will link into the work our departments do, and in terms of revalidating curriculum. But all the time we're liaising with our students' union, with our student reps, and through our student engagement team to ensure that we're joining up the student experience and also ensuring that we can make sure we're supporting staff to support the students in those experiences. So I think I'll stop there, since I can't see anything from the meeting.
Perfect timing.
Thank you, Andrew. That's really helpful to see the screen. So thank you. And if I can answer questions, I'm obviously really happy to.
Brilliant. Thank you, Elisabeth. Can you hear me?
What Linda's saying, so Andrew, you might have to relay.
Oh, well, sorry. Hopefully you can now hear everything.
Okay, Elisabeth, can you hear me okay?
You're a bit distorted, but I'll try and think so.
Okay, so thank you very much for that. That was really excellent. There's a question that about the Panopto system, and I think that's been answered on the question area, but I wondered if the audience had other questions they wanted to put input. But while that's going on, one of the things that I think has come through in all of the talks today has been the kind of commitment to student engagement and student voice. And Elisabeth, I noted you were talking about pulse surveys and getting student engagement and getting student feedback, and it was really positive to see your MA students valuing the work that's being done. But I'm just wondering, going forward, is there a sense that that there will be a more relaxed next year, in that it will settle down and there will be a new regular pattern emerging? Or are you also having to plan for, and this is really open to everybody, plan for in things like, you know, lockdowns and tiers and all of the things that we may face in the autumn? Are you having to think about a blended provision, or actually a flexible hybrid provision that will see some people changing from face-to-face to online very rapidly?
So shall I come in first?
Yes, please, Elisabeth. Yeah.
I think it's a really good question, and it's kind of the $1 million question for next year. I think, well, so speaking personally, I think it's important. I think students want to be back on campus as much as possible next year. We know that many students are back on our campuses, even when they were, strictly speaking, not supposed to be. Students want those experiences, and we're certainly intending to deliver as much of that face-to-face experience as we reasonably can. But I think certainly for us, some of that experience, we will never probably go back to a fully, to a non-blended approach, although the majority of our delivery will probably be face-to-face in the longer term. But certainly for the next academic year, I think all universities have to have in mind that there will be potentially fluctuating changes. And also that many students may, because of where they live in the world, may end up being restricted to when they can arrive in the country, whether they have to spend a long time in isolation. All of these sorts of factors, I think, will still be with us, at least in the autumn term and possibly beyond. So I sort of see next year as a bit of a transition year in that respect, where hopefully things will be quite settled, but we have to expect things might change quite quickly. But of course, we've got our experiences now, having gone through sort of 1.5 academic years in a COVID environment, switching quickly and then in a bit more of a planned way. So there's a lot more of that switching backwards and forwards experience to draw on, and to build on and improve on.
Fantastic. Yes, it's a good point, isn't it, that we do have that experience, but I suspect you're right. Stephanie, did you want to come in on that idea of what it's going to be like? And we're almost at the end of the session, so if people have to leave, I completely understand, but as we were a bit delayed with technical issues, I'm hoping we might take a few more minutes of people's time just to finish off today.
Yeah, I'd certainly echo what Elisabeth has said there, that we've equipped the staff to think exactly in that way. We might need to flip at any time. What I have emphasised particularly is we are never going back to that fully face-to-face, because some have been saying, come on, can't we have the full lectures again? And, you know, I've argued why. Our students argued for years for lecture capture, and we use Panoply as well. And it was university policy, but still we didn't have it everywhere. I won't go into the details about that. But in terms of what the students have said, they actually really do appreciate the asynchronous lectures, and they love, and also, I mean, sometimes I think when they were able to even group together, socially distance as well, and perhaps to watch on their own devices so that they could kind of debrief together, they found it vastly preferable to sitting in a lecture theatre. The only exception being they like the social aspect of walking in together or walking away together. So we've got to address that. And it is those social bits that we've got to work on. The only thing that I have to say I'm concerned about is, because last summer was spent on the real effort to ramp up what we were doing online, that we've got, okay, we've got our ref submission in, but nevertheless, to really kickstart the research side, you're making the point then about that. It's all been about teaching. Getting that balance back is what we need to do, and I think that agility and flexibility has just got to be part of the future, because we don't know what the future holds. If there are different variations on the COVID or different strains that the vaccination might not work against, then we've just got to be prepared to do whatever. I think flexibility and making sure we've got something robust in there, which are all things I think JISC are supporting us with.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a really good point. And hopefully with the use of WhatsApp and phone calls, we've demonstrated a little flexibility here this afternoon to continue to deliver this webinar. John, did you want to come in at the end there? And we will close after this.
I think Elisabeth and Stephanie have covered it, and I really enjoyed both presentations. I would just go back to the point that Chris Husbands made about needing to know our students better, and I think that's kind of been sort of reinforced really by what we've heard from Queen Mary and Goldsmiths, Linda. And well done all for persevering with the tech. It's stressful. Everybody, at least to me, appeared very calm. Well done.
Thank you very much. There was a last comment that came in there, and I think it's a really good question. It's about how do you design asynchronous and synchronous together, and it goes back to something that I think we've talked about throughout this, and we won't be able to address it now. But it's that question of how do we support the learning behaviours of our students, and I think Stephanie talked about this a little bit, so that they understand successful ways of learning in an agile, flexible, possibly constantly changing environment. So I'm going to use that as a hook into my closing slide, which I hope people can see. So a very big thank you to everybody for attending. A massive thank you to our panel, John, Stephanie and Elisabeth, and to Andrew for helping us through this this afternoon. We will put everything onto the website, the Centre for Distance Education website, and we'll send you a link for that. And our next session, which is coming up on the 3rd of June, I hope really builds on this, because it's talking about the student perspective from the point of view of students. So we will have a panel of students in a variety of contexts, undergraduate and postgraduate, giving us some of their thoughts and perspectives on what it's been like, and what they hope for and need in the next coming year. So look forward to seeing you on the 3rd of June. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us, and thanks to our panel again.